Hi, it's Gary Jublin. Thanks for listening. This podcast was made possible with the support of subscribers to iCatchKillers.com.au. For ad-free access to new episodes of I Catch Killers before anyone else, exclusive content like videos of my interviews and award-winning investigative journalism, go to iCatchKillers.com.au to see our range of subscription offers. The public has a long-held fascination with detectives. Detectives see a side of life the average person is never exposed to. In this podcast series, I Catch Killers with Gary Jublin, I'll be interviewing a whole range of people you come across as a detective, including police, bad guys and victims. I spent 34 years as a cop. For 25 of those years I was catching killers. That's what I did for a living. I was a homicide detective. I'm no longer just interviewing bad guys. Instead, I'm taking the public into the world in which I operated. The guests I selected have amazing stories from all sides of the law. The interviews are raw and honest, just like the world they inhabited. No one who steps into the world of crime comes out unchanged. Join me now while I take you into this world. This episode of I Catch Killers contains conversations that some listeners may find confronting or triggering. Discretion is advised. Welcome back to part 3 of I Catch Killers with guest Bernie Matthews. We've talked about his life as an armed robber, as an escapee, his capture and the violence inflicted upon him whilst in custody, and the violence he inflicted on others. We left part 2 with Bernie talking to us about how disorientating Katingal Jail was, not just for the prisoners but also the prison guards. Katingal was Australia's first supermax prison, where the worst of the worst were housed. It was a prison within a prison. Set in the grounds of Long Bay, it was a large white building. Bernie also made the interesting comment how unnerving it was when he was not flogged, when he was taken to Katingal. He was welcomed by the governor, McTaggart, who explained to him he was not going to get flogged. Floggings were something Bernie had become very accustomed to at Grafton Prison. Again, a listener warning is advised. Today's content will be heavy and confronting. So Bernie, if we could just continue on. You've come into, after spending some very hard time in Grafton Prison, where physical floggings were the norm. You've then gone into Katingal. Your experience when you walked in there, you were disorientated. You pointed out how the different areas of the prison were colour-coded, so to stop the prison wardens getting disorientated in the premises. Do you want to take us from there, what your impressions of Katingal were?
Yeah, well, in Katingal, the longest distance you could walk in a straight line was 21 steps. That was the longest distance I could walk in 2 years, 8 months. I never saw a blade of grass. I never saw a bird, never saw a tree. Everything was artificial. The air was pumped in, that was artificial. It's really hard to explain. I guess the best way, when people have asked me about Katingal, the best way I've explained it is it's like living in a submarine for 2 years and not coming up above the water. You know, yeah, there's a lot of things that happen, and now I guess there's a lot of things that happen to my mind in there. But I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I can't comment on that. But it was the disorientation from one end of the state where you're like in a bathtub full of hot water, and they bring you to another end of the state and they dump you in a bath full of ice cold water. It's just a shock that's,
There was that much difference from Grafton Prison to Katingal?
Oh, yeah. Like at Grafton, they're flogging the shit out of you. In Katingal, the screws are trying to be good fellas and run around and delivering your meals through the hatch at the back. And, it was just a mind blow.
I might make the observation, wouldn't that be a better environment than the floggings?
Of course. Initially it was, because you didn't realise how insidious the place was, how it got into your head. You looked at the situation, and the situation was, as you just explained, wasn't it better than the floggings at Grafton? Of course it was better. And the principle was run along the lines of Pavlov's dogs. You behave yourself, you graduate to the next level. You behave yourself again, and you graduate to the final level. Now, the levels were 1, 2 and 3. At the final level, you had access to a television set in the workshop. Now, that was unusual. Like, I hadn't seen a television set for, 5 years.
Yep.
The second level, you got a radio. The first level you got locked up at 6 o'clock, I think, and then up until the third level you got let out. You're out of your cell until 9:30 if you wanted to. So it was a whole new experience, and I guess one of the first things that hit me, and I spoke to a couple of blokes about it. That night I fell into a sleep. The next morning I had a terrific headache. And every one of us had the same reaction. Well, we put it down to they put something in the meal to calm us down, whether it's Larkactil or some sort of sleeping tablet, I don't know. Mm. But of course, they never admitted to that. Yeah. It was just the situation that occurred. So I guess they were a little bit worried about how we would react to that environment. In the initial stages, 75, 76, I think everybody was just taking it one step at a time and just feeling the new ground. And then, of course, in 76, the Royal Commission kicked off, and that opened up a whole new ball game. But for us in Katingal, we were in a world all by ourselves. We were like on another planet.
I think that's probably a way to describe it, because I described it as futuristic, but it was almost like a spaceship. You described it as a submarine.
Yeah.
Did it dull your senses? Did it...
I don't really know. I can't really answer that. Like from a professional point of view, because I'm not a professional. Yeah. But what I found in there, what motivated me in there was what the detective said in 1970, defamation, and that word, resounded through my brain, and I started. Okay, I'm gonna chase these mongrels up that defame me, which is the newspapers. So what I did is I started chasing up anything on defamation, the defamation laws, and I ended up going overseas, bought aerograms and sent it to the European Commission of Human Rights, the American Civil Liberties Union, New Zealand. I wrote everywhere. Well, of course, the screws thought, well, listen, he's doing something that's keeping him occupied. Let's help him, because while he's occupied and he's immersed in that, he's not going to be causing us any trouble.
So the intellectual pursuit was...
It began in there, yeah.
And that was gaining knowledge about...
about defamation.
Defamation.
Yeah, because I guess even then it was a form of revenge or vengeance. I wanted to get back at the newspapers because they'd wronged me. They'd bagged me for something I hadn't done.
Yeah.
And to top it all off, they hadn't turned around and said, okay, look, we made a mistake. It wasn't him. There was no apology. There's no...
Not a retraction.
No retraction. To say to everyone, all intents and purposes, I was the crazed rapist that escaped the bay. So... there was nothing much I could do because I was a prisoner. So, theoretically, I had no good standing in the community. But what a lot of people didn't understand is that rubbed off on my immediate family, and that cut deep.
Yeah, I can imagine that hurting them. Mm. Tell me the average day in Katingal.
Average day, you'd wake up, you'd hear the clang of the food hatch at the back of the cell, and that was the screw putting through your breakfast. So you get your breakfast out, and again, breakfast was a lot different to graft, and you had the little sachets of honey, the little sachets of jam, the little sachets of sugar, cereal. It was a whole new ball game. It was like motel meals, and again, from it was a contradiction. Yeah, it was a contradiction to grafting. Anyway.
To me, describing that, I just got an image of a dog that's been mistreated, and then you show it kindness, and it's still sort of resistant. Wary.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Agree.
And did you think in your mind that all these luxuries, which would be luxuries compared to what you'd been getting, would be taken away from you? What was the?
Well, that thought never really crossed my mind. What crossed my mind was if you don't progress up the ladder, you're not going to get to where you can watch TV overnight or read the newspaper or listen to the radio. So they could pull that at their whim, and they could, and by the same token, they could justify stopping your visits, and you only get a visit, say once a month, once every 28 days, or once every fortnight, and that doesn't necessarily be a contact visit. So they had all those sanctions to apply if they needed to
control you.
Yeah.
So getting back to the average day, your breakfast.
You have breakfast, and then you've got one or two things. You can come out of your cell, you can go for a walk along the walkway, you can go into the workshop, And if you're up to level 3, you can watch TV. So you can watch TV from, say, 10 o'clock till 6 o'clock or 9:30 of the night. So that's the normal day. Now, in the initial stages, that was all good and well. It was really, it was a whole new ball game. It was really good. It was a lot different than grafting. But after a while, it wore off. The gloss wore off. And getting back to what you said about taking things away, well, there wasn't really much they could take away.
Yeah.
All you had was your body. Your body in the uniform. There's nothing else. What can you take? Then, as I said, I started pursuing the defamation. Well, they gave me the typewriter. And they've gone, oh, well, that'll shut him up. Like he won't cause any problems. So that did quiet me down, and I started branching out. I started chasing up defamation laws. I got all these cases from the US, from the civil liberties, and I ended up coming in contact with a young journalist on the Auckland Star-Times. Her name was Donna Chisholm. And I started writing to Donna. And what sparked that off was a bloke called Jorgensen. Now, Jorgensen, in Auckland, he'd been convicted of he'd been convicted of murder, like an underworld murder in Auckland, and he was sentenced to life. And he was in Parumarimo. Now, Parumarimo was New Zealand's maximum security prison, or their supermax over there. And a Kiwi prisoner got out of Parumarimo, and he was interviewed on a current affair, the New Zealand equivalent of a current affair. And he said in his interview that Jorgensen was an informer in jail. Now, Jorgensen sued the television station, saying, well, look, that's a lie, that's defamatory, and what you've done is you've placed my life in danger.
At risk.
Right? So he went to court and he won the case. Now, he didn't get awarded damages. He got, I think it was 20 cents damages or something like that, but he won the case. Now, to me, that was a win.
That's the principle.
Yeah, the principle was a win. And I was arguing that what they'd done to me was worse than what had happened to Jorgensen, but it was on par, it was on level. So I grabbed that case, and I got in touch with the Registrar of the European Commission of Human Rights, and I became very friendly with him via aerograms and letters and that. And he started sending me all the European Commission of Human Rights. And one of the cases he sent me was the Sydney Elmer Golder case. Now, the Golder case concerned a bloke on Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight, which was their maximum security prison in the UK. And what had happened is there was a riot over there, and Golder was accused of being one of the ringleaders in the riot. Now, he denied it, but it went on his prison file that he was a ringleader. So when he came up for parole, they said, we're not going to give you parole because you're a ringleader in the riot. He said, I wasn't a ringleader in the riot. And he had a screw that came up and gave evidence, said, no, he wasn't in the riot, blah, blah, blah. Well, in 1975, I think it was, the UK became part of the European Economic Community, which gave them access to the European Commission of Human Rights and the European Court of Human Rights. Well, Golder was the first British prisoner to complain to the European Commission of Human Rights.
Right.
And his complaint was that the Home Secretary, who ran the prisons over there, wouldn't allow him to have or get a lawyer to sue the screws for defamation. Anyway, it went through the European Commission of Human Rights. The Commission sent it up to the European Court of Human Rights, and in a unanimous decision, they found in Golder's favour, which was another plus to me. And what had happened, it had forced the UK to change all their prison rules. So I had the Jorgensen case and the Golder case. So I was building up all these cases by writing overseas. Now, the screws didn't see any problem with that. They didn't see me causing any damage by contacting all these connections overseas. But what had effectively happened is I'd established contacts worldwide in the US and Strasbourg and New Zealand that, hey, listen, this was my case here, and this is what's happening here. Anyway, what was the next thing? Oh, they had a playwrights, the 1977 playwrights convention in Canberra, and I thought, yeah, I can do that. I can write a play.
And this is from Katingal.
Yeah. I thought I can do that. Yeah. So I wrote a play, and I called it Tumbling Dice, and it was about Grafton. It was both plays were based on Grafton, and it was about the tracks and our reaction to different things up there, the brutality and all the rest of it, but our reaction to a prisoner who comes up up there as a track, and we find out he's a pedophile.
Right.
You know? So that was the first play. Then that got awarded. That got shortlisted. It got awarded. What was it? A reading at the Playwrights Convention. But I couldn't attend it because I was in jail. Anyway, the next year I wrote another one, and again I got recognition for that play, but I never really followed them through. They're still stuck in a box somewhere at home. But
that second play, what was that one called?
Squaring Up.
Squaring Up,
which was basically revenge.
Okay.
You know, and basically, it was basically the raw essence of what places like Grafton do to you.
Yeah.
And how you react.
This intellectual pursuit, writing and researching and that, did you find that you were changing your outlook on life? We've been able to do those type of things.
I found
your interests there.
I found I was able to put two words together on paper, and that was a big plus. So I knew I could communicate on paper.
Yeah.
So I sort of fine-tuned it, for want of a better word. And 1976 was a big year for me because the defamation case sort of came to a grinding halt.
Yeah.
As I said, I was in touch with Donna Chisholm in Auckland. I continued writing to her. But she sort of speared me into a journalistic sort of direction. Not 100%, but sort of steered me in that direction. Anyway, in 1976, Darcy Dugan, he was a very close friend of mine. We were at Grafton together in 1970-71. And Darcy,
so just for the people that don't know Darcy Dugan, and just a very brief description, he was an armed robber, but he was also had escaped a number of times, and I think he met his demise in a police shootout with police.
No, he died. Darcy died in 1991 in a nursing home. He didn't get shot.
Right.
No.
Did he get locked up with Christopher Binns?
No.
Right. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, Darcy was an escapee from the 50s. Darcy and Mears, they held up the Commonwealth Bank in Oldham in 1950, I think it was, and.
Sorry, I'm thinking Jockey Smith.
That's different. That's a different ball game. Jockey was in Katingal.
Yeah.
But anyway, Darcy was up at Grafton. We became friends and all the rest of it. Well, Darcy was also pursuing a defamation case.
Yep.
Now, Darcy's defamation case was different than mine in that his news media in Sydney published his record of escaping, being a prisoner, doing this, doing that, one thing and the other. And his argument was that the news media had prejudiced every potential juror in New South Wales. Yep. That was his, and he had a valid argument. Anyway, Darcy's case went up before mine, and went up before Justice Yeldham, David Yeldham, in the Supreme Court in Sydney. And Yeldham ruled. He dug out an old law that dated all the way back to the convict era. And the law was that if you came out here as a convicted felon, you forfeited all legal and civil rights. You suffered what they termed an attainder of blood, or a corruption of blood. Therefore, you weren't allowed to sue or claim for damages. Now, Yeldham imposed that ruling on Dugan's case, and that sort of threw it out. Now, by Darcy's case getting thrown out, mine didn't get to the starting block.
Right.
Now, Darcy pursued the case to the High Court of Australia. So I had to wait and see what happened to Darcy's case.
Get a precedent.
Yeah, well, in 1978, the High Court of Australia, again with, I think it was Justice Murphy dissenting. I think it was Murphy, but there was one judge dissenting, but they upheld Yeldham's ruling. So, in effect, what the courts, all the way to the High Court, said, the news media in New South Wales could say anything they want to about a convicted felon, and you suffer no retribution whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that's where it stood.
Yeah, I can understand your frustration from it. So with these pursuits that you were doing in Katingal, but it started to have an effect on you, because there was a time where you tried to set your cell alight.
Yeah, well,
how did that? What was the build up to that?
Well, that was like, and that's what I said. Katingal was so insidious.
Yep.
You didn't realise it was seeping into your mind, into your body. You just. You just got used to getting locked in the cell, getting out, walking your 21 steps, and that's it. You just become a little robot.
Yeah.
And and I noticed it. I noticed it with a couple of other blokes, but it didn't really register. But in September '77, I cracked up one Saturday night, and I was in the workshop. I said, "Oh, fuck this! I've had this shit." And Fred and Earl and Barry, I said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Oh, I've had this. I've had it." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm going to torch the joint." And they tried to talk me. I said, "Hey, Bern, look, go back to your cell, calm down." You know. But I was calm. I wasn't mouthing off or anything. I said, no, I've had it. I'll torch it. Anyway, the blokes tried to talk me out. No, I wasn't coming into it. They walked out of the cell block. The screw said, "Come on, get out of the shop." I said, "Get fucked." So they shut the door, and I tied the door up with the electrical cords from the TV. And we had newspapers in the workshop. And they put the other blokes in the cell, and they brought all the screws up. Said, "Come on, Matthews, come out of the cell, do this, do that, do that." Nah, get fucked. And I just torched the place. What I didn't realise was the linoleum or the floor covering was a special type of linoleum, and it let off noxious fumes. I didn't have a clue about that. And of course, the whole workshop's gone up in flames, and I'm in there. Well, the screws have got to try and get me out. Well, I'm armed up with a bull worker. Well, they've cut the cord on the door, and I come in the door, and then it was on for young and old. I started swinging the bull worker and attacking them. They've attacked me. They've maced me. In the end, they've knocked me out. I'm out like a light, and they dragged me out of there. They took me over to the OBS at the Central Industrial Prison, and they put me on a 24-hour watch. They had a screw outside the door 24 hours. No one was to come near me. I wasn't allowed anyone near me. Meals were to be delivered by the screws. Well, I didn't realise how bad I was damaged. Anyway, I couldn't piss. And they brought the doctor down, and they said, "Oh, you've got something. You've swallowed a mouthful of this mace." Anyway, they inserted a thing to drain the shit out of my body. And then I was on the Saturday night. About the Monday or the Tuesday, the head office, two of the head office screws come out to interview me. And the very first thing they said, "Well, Jesus Christ," I go, "That's right, it was the week of the grand final. It was the weekend of the grand final," because the screw said, "Jesus Christ, looks like you've just come off the paddock from the grand final." Well, I hadn't seen myself. I didn't know what I looked like. But apparently my nose was busted, and I had black eyes and all the rest of it. Anyway, he said, "Do you want to lodge a complaint?" I said, "What for?" He said, "What's the point? You're not going to do nothing about it." He said, "Well, what happened?" I said, "I really don't want to talk about it. It's done, it's dusted." I said, "When am I going back?" Anyway, they said, "Oh, when your health's sorted out." Well, what happened then, it's really, really weird how situations eventuate. There was a journalist from the National Times called Ann Summers. Now, I ended up meeting Ann the year later, but she got a whisper that there was trouble in the blockhouse. And what had happened is a lawyer had gone out to see Earl. And,
this is Earl Heatley.
Yeah.
Yep.
And she said she'd gone in the visiting box and there's blood everywhere. And she looked at the blood. She said, "What's that, Earl?" She said, "Oh, that's Bernie's blood." She said, "What happened?" And he told her. He said, "Oh, he's torched the workshop on the Saturday night, and he's just disappeared off the planet. No one knows where he is." Well, she got in touch with Ann Summers. That started the ball rolling. Ann made a request to correct it. Says, "Where's Matthews?" "Oh, he's at Bathurst." So she rings Bathurst. "Oh, he's gone to Goulburn." So she gets to run around the state, whereas I'm actually in the Long Bay. And then she decides to ring the prison doctor at the bay. So she rang him. I forget his name, but she rang him and she said, "Oh, look, I'm making some inquiries about the injuries sustained by prisoner Matthews." Well, the doctors just give it to her, lock, stock and barrel. So, "Oh, yeah, he's got this, he's got that, he's got this." Well, of course, she's got the story. Yeah. Well, that blows up in the National Times. Well, they couldn't keep a lid on it. So they put me back in Katingal, but they isolate me in the cell block by myself. But the Royal Commission's going on. And, of course, the last thing they want is they want news about an insurrection in Katingal. So they kept me under wraps for about a month and a half, and then things died down and went back to normal. That was in 1977. Then in November, that was in September, then in November Russell escaped.
Okay. Now this is Russell
Cox, yeah.
escaping from, and he'd already escaped from Long Bay.
No, he didn't get out from the bay. They had the shootout.
Shootout with the bread truck and all that. But he was the first person to escape from Katingal.
The first and only.
And that was part of the government sell on it. It's escape proof.
It was escape proof.
So that wouldn't have gone down well. But tell us about the escape.
Well, without talking out of school.
No, don't give up your methodology, but what you can tell.
Well, a hacksaw blade was smuggled in, and I think it's common knowledge now. There was a crew from Maitland. There'd been a mass escape from Maitland. 7 blokes had escaped from Maitland jail, but they'd been recaptured that day. Well, they'd been dumped in Katingal. Well, they had to go back to Maitland court, to front court. Now, some of those guys Denning was one of them, and Shipley's dead now. He was another one, and there were 5 others. Now, what the game plan was, was they were all going to have a mass escape from Katingal. That was the game plan. The blokes from Maitland had to go back to Maitland court. Well, Denning and his sidekick had decided they're going to have a go from the van on the way to Maitland because it's about a 2-hour trip, and if they get out, fine. If not, hold off the escape until we come back to Katingal. When we get back to Katingal, we'll all go again. So he had virtually 2 bites of the cherry.
Yeah.
So that was the game plan. They went to court that day, but they didn't come back that night. So I guess Russell was thinking, well, fuck, where are they? They were supposed to come back after the court case, but they didn't come back. What we didn't know is they'd tried to escape from the van. The escorting screws had realised it was an escape attempt. They pulled the van into one of the police stations, searched the van, found an hacksaw blade, and kept them at Maitland overnight to try and get to the bottom of it. And they were going to bring them back the next day.
Right.
Well, nobody knew that.
Yeah.
Or they were going to bring them back, I don't know, the next day or the day after. Well, the next night, Russell's gone, well, what do? Do I take it or do I leave it and wait for them to come back? Well, if he left it and they found it, the escape was gone. It was over. So he opted out to take it, and that's exactly what happened. He took it. Well, of course, the blokes come back 2 days later, and a couple of them were whinging and whining about, oh, yeah, well, he should have waited. Well, fuck me dead, you know. We don't know what's happened to you.
My understanding and how it was explained to me was that in the exercise, I won't call it a yard, it was like a courtyard, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like a courtyard, yeah.
The bars above, and you would play wall ball out
That's
there.
Right, handball, yeah.
Handball. And that Russell had, with the hacksaw blade, cut through one of the bars there, and that's what.
That's
right. That's how he escaped.
That's
through
right.
There. Yeah.
That's right. Like he didn't do it by himself, but that's irrelevant. But the fact of the matter is, that's how it went down.
Okay, and he stayed on the run for
11
over
years.
a decade. Yeah. Okay, so that would have had an immediate effect on.
Did it what?
Katingal.
Oh yeah. Well, the first thing that happened is they shut all the food hatches, so the air flow to the cells was minimal. And they just took it out on everyone that was left in there, but we didn't care because he'd escaped. He'd defeated him. So to us, it was a victory. It didn't matter what you did to us. We'd been through the worst. So, do your worst.
And would that lift spirits in a prison when someone escaped?
It did.
Yeah.
Okay. And
you've got to understand too that in there we had, I've described it as the City Tattersalls Club of the New South Wales prison system, which was the people that went through Grafton and Katingal were bonded by the brutality and the isolation. There was an invisible bond, for want of a better word, and that bond that was created in those places lasted for 11 years.
Yeah,
lasted for 11 years. Like I remember when they got Russell and Denning in Melbourne, Victoria. One of the newspapers, well, a couple of the newspapers said, "Listen, Denning's escaped. He's only been out 8 days. How the hell did he, in 8 days, track down a bloke that the New South Wales, Victorian and Queensland police have been looking for 11 years? It's quite simple.
Yeah.
Blokes in that little City Tattersalls Club, they knew all the way along the line, but they weren't talking.
They were tight.
Yeah. And
staunch.
That was the system.
Yeah.
That was the nuts and bolts of it. And of course Denning broke that. He rolled over, but that's another story. But that's the story.
So the shutting down the air vents and
shutting down
making
the air
life
vent.
hard for you. So how Did that play out?
Well, what happened is they started to get suicides, the fair income suicide attempts, no half-baked suicide attempts. So it was really getting to blokes. And I was the first one. Well, I wasn't the first one to crack. There was a couple of others that cracked, but we sort of never took that into consideration. I was the first major one to sort of, I had this
really
shit.
Buck the system. Yeah. There was a passage in your book. It wasn't about you, but it was about another prisoner that said he stopped writing letters because he had nothing to say because every day was the same.
Harry Visser.
Right, okay. And that's how you felt? It's just
There's no difference.
Groundhog Day
There's
day.
No difference. None whatsoever. And then he had the suicide attempts. Then that was 77. Yeah, then 78, late 77, early 78. Then the air conditioning system packed up over Christmas, 77, and mate, that was major. Well, we had no air. There was no air whatsoever in the place. So
suffocating.
We were at shit.
Yeah.
So blokes were using the toilet to get breathe through the toilet, breathe under to get any fresh air you could. They brought the air conditioning mechanics in and they fixed it up for 3 days and it packed up again. And of course there was excuses. Oh look, it's not our fault. It's the mechanics and all the rest of this shit. But what that did is it compounded the issue. Blokes were really, really getting stressed out in there. And that's what I was saying about the insidious nature of Katingal. It sort of grew on you and you sort of didn't see logic anymore.
Yeah.
It just didn't make sense. There was no logic in what you thought or what you did. Then I think the big thing that happened was Barry Levy. I was playing handball with him out in the courtyard, and he fell over. He always reckons I tripped him over to win the game, but that's not true.
What a horrible allegation!
Yeah. But what happened is he broke his ankle, so he's in a bad way. So we carried him into the cell.
Yeah.
And we said to the screw, listen, he's in a bad way. He's either sprained his ankle. We don't know. We're not doctors, but he's in a bad way. And our screw said, well, all right, I'll notify the hospital. Now, we had no medical system in Katingal. Like, if you wanted a doctor or a nurse, they had to come from the prison hospital in Long Bay. So they had to come out of the bay, get admitted into Katingal, and come and see us. That was the system. Anyway, what had happened is the screws had gone on strike. Now, the prison medical staff had gone out in sympathy. So there was no prison medical staff at the bay.
Right.
So of course we're blueing about Barry and his broken ankle, and he was in pain, and I said, "Listen, you've got to do something about this. He's in pain." Blah blah blah. Anyway, the governor was a governor called Bowden, and he was just a martinet. He was unbelievable, and anyway, without going into his personalities, he sort of run that place into the ground. It was his own little domain, and he was king of the shit pile, and he wanted to remain on top. And he said, well, we can't get a doctor, you'll have to wait till, we got a doctor. Well, of course you couldn't wait. The bloke's in agony. So he said, listen, you don't get a doctor, we're going to fucking riot. And I said, yeah, well, that's what happened. We all rioted. And, of course, that's got out. And they sent the TRG. I don't know whether you was on the TRG then, but they sent them out. They encircled the Katingal. Yep. And, it was full on. Anyway, they ended up, they got a nurse over, a male nurse. He examined him. He said, mate, the bloke's got to go to hospital. He's in a bad way. Anyway, they took Barry to hospital. They put pins in. It was broken. His ankle was broken. But he never came back. They kept him in hospital. He went from hospital back to the jail. Yeah. So I guess, it got him out of the place. So that happened, and the riot went down, and then they came in. They said, oh, look, they came up with all the bullshit. You stop the riot, they got the TRG outside, they're going to come in. We don't give a fuck. We've got nothing to lose.
What are you going to do?
Yeah, what are you going to do to us? Bash us? Yeah. I've been there, done that.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was sort of a no-win situation for the authorities. Anyway, Bowden came up that night about 5 o'clock. He said, listen, I know you blokes don't like me. He said, I know, this has happened, that's happened. He said, I'm being shipped, I'm being transferred as governor to another jail. The new governor is Craig. Well, of course, he went, hey, you beauty, piss off, get out of here. So, of course, he left. Craig came up. He was the new acting governor. He said, look, fellas, there's nothing I can do if you continue with the riot. There's going to be trouble. So we sort of minimised it, and we ended up going back to our cells, and the riot was over. But that was early '78, and there was all bubbles, and there was the whole place was a bubbling, seething cauldron of tension. And what happened next was the Royal Commission handed down its recommendations in early '78, and the first recommendation was that Katingal be shut because it was inhuman. So that was it. The government was forced to shut it.
Yeah.
And, of course, the screws that acted up said, look, you can't shut it. We've got all these dangerous blokes in there. Where are we going to put them? Anyway, they said, well, Ryan was the premier, and he procrastinated from about January that year, February that year, till May, I think it was. Yeah, May, June. And he procrastinated about shutting it because the Screws Union had a bit of clout and votes and all the rest of it. Anyway, there was the break-in, and that was in May.
Talk us through that.
Well, that's an interesting one. Jimmy Murray was in the cell next door to me. It was about 1 o'clock one morning, 2 o'clock one morning. And he's knocked on the wall. Give me the graph knock. He said, listen, Bern, they're here. I said, what? He said, look out the window. Now, had a little Judas window in your cell, in the cell door. And if you looked out the window, you could see the compound, through the glass like area. So I looked out, and all I saw was this shower of sparks. Fuck! It was just it was a waterfall of sparks. It was in the middle of the night, and I'm going, fuck. Well, what was happening is they were cutting through the bars on the yard, and they managed to get down to the outer door, and they were cutting through that.
Right.
So, and once they got through that, they had another door to get through, and then we were all out, because then they got onto the compound, turned off the controls, and all the cell doors were open. So it was pretty close.
I'm not going to ask you this out of respect for your code, but were you guys aware that someone was going to try and...
We were aware something was in the wind, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So...
That's without saying I'm an accessory before the fact.
No, I deny that allegation.
Yeah.
No, I just because that was fairly.
Oh, it's full on.
That's just another twist. Someone breaking into a jail to
free
break people out.
Yeah.
That's
and not just a normal jail, to the highest security supermax prison in the country.
Yeah. That was a statement. That.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was a big statement. Anyway, we're watching the sparks, and there was a screw, and he was an Indian screw. Oh, I'll never forget this. He was an Indian screw, and he wasn't a bad screw. His name was Parker, and Parker had come to the end of the control section, where the controls were, and they'd knocked over an oxy bottle, something that there was a loud clang, and any kind of noise like that echoes through the building. Yeah. And of course he'd heard the noise and he couldn't work out what it was. So he thought it was one of the crims knocking up on the cell door. They were sick or they wanted something. So he's come onto the control panel and he's going, who's knocking? And he's walking along and he comes up to the end and he sees these sparks. And I know this, I'm not being prejudiced, I'm not being racist, but I've never seen an Indian turn white. He just turned pure white. He looked out that window and he was glued to the window for about 5 seconds. Then he's hit the panic button. He's realised what's going on. And of course the alarms have gone up and the blokes have pissed off and they've got the oxy bottles and they've realised, there's a break-in. And that was the final nail in the coffin for Katingal. The next week we're all shipped out.
Right. Where did you find yourself after that?
Parramatta Circle.
Right, so that's the
went back to where I started. 8 years later.
Life has a funny way of doing that.
Yeah, it does.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this. Just before we finish on Katingal, I think with the Royal Commission, the reports or assessment that anyone that spends any longer period than 6 months in there is going to have going to have a significant impact on their mental well-being.
That's right.
There was I think it was the head of the medical service, the prison medical service was a bloke called Houston. He gave evidence to the Royal Commission and said basically, anyway, and a bloke called Trembath, he was a psychologist.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one it was, but one of them said anyone who stays in there longer than 6 months will suffer irreparable psychiatric or psychological damage.
Yeah, yeah.
And most of us stayed in here for 12 months onwards. In my case, 2 years, 8 months.
Yeah, you were the longest in there. Yeah. And I can see...
And I don't think I'm Gaga. I don't think I'm good for a while. For a straight jacket,
I'm not qualified to say that.
I'll wear that.
But I can see, Bernie, when you're talking about it, then all jokes aside, there's still an emotional reaction at the mention of it. I can see that you're traumatised, and we've talked about a lot of shit today.
Yeah.
And the fact that it has had a lasting impact on you.
Yeah, and we're talking about stuff that happened half a century ago. It didn't happen yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's what your prisons produce.
Yeah.
And that's what you got.
Well, that was almost like an experiment, that one, wasn't it? And I think you've also said, and I can't recall if it's in your book or when we've been talking, but you've gone from physical abuse to mental abuse.
Yeah, psychological, mental.
Yeah. And you've likened it to hot water to cold water.
Yeah.
It was that
That's the best way to
you?
explain it, because, like I can't use psychological words and psychological textbook words.
Yeah.
I'm not equipped to.
Yeah.
But I try to explain it in an everyman's language.
Yeah.
This is what it felt like to me. You dump me in a bathtub full of boiling hot water, then you lift me out and you dump me in a bathtub full of icy cold water.
Just extreme.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, extreme. All right, well, we got you past Katingal. You go back to Parramatta.
Yeah,
You're
Circle.
in the Circle in Parramatta. So a Circle, and just refreshing everyone's understanding of that, that's maximum security within the
inside
prison.
Parramatta. It's not there anymore, but the Circle was like a segmented, an orange that was segmented into sections, and those sections were yards. So you had a circle, a concrete circle, with a guard tower over top. And by the way, they'd put iron mesh there since Mick and I tried to escape. They'd got rid of the chicken wire and they put iron mesh up there, so you can't go through the top anymore.
Good one, Bern.
Yeah, I'd stuffed that one up.
Anyway, you would have been popular.
Anyway, it was a prison in a prison, but it was segmented, and the segments were actual yards. You know, and you spent 8 hours a day, and then you went back into your cell. And Duff was the governor, Harry Duff, and he came over and saw us all. I went to Parramatta, Jimmy Murray, Freddie Harbeck, Owens, Denning and James went to Maitland, Holmes went to Maitland. Who else went to Parramatta? Earl had got out. Earl had got out of the Katingal about a year before. So the hardcore was sort of farmed between Maitland and Parramatta Jail. Well, Duff came over and said, listen, this is the ball game. If you behave yourself, I'll let you out one at a time. But the first one that fucks up, you all go back in the circle.
Right.
Sweet. So I think Jimmy Murray was the first, and Fred got out. I was about the fourth or the fifth to get out.
Yep.
And of course, we weren't going to stuff it up, so stop the other blokes from getting out. And we sort of gravitated back into normal prison discipline. Now, again, normal prison discipline was like landing on another planet again. Like I've come out of this atomic bomb shelter where you don't even see a blade of grass, and they got an oval out there where you can run around, and there's grass everywhere. It's you just don't appreciate the little things in life.
Little things, how important it becomes. Well, there's something that you've mentioned that in prison you never heard a baby cry at night.
That's right.
And little deprivations like that, things that you would take for granted.
And that one thing stuck with me all my life.
Yeah.
You never hear, you hear them on the visit.
Yeah.
But in jail in the middle of the night, you never hear a baby cry.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah, it's isolation, isn't it? So with your freedom in Parramatta, you eventually got out of the circle.
Yep.
How did you handle that freedom?
Well, we all stuck together.
Yeah.
As I said, we were like a tight little unit. And like if you were in the jail, okay, I might know you.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't penetrate that circle unless you'd been
through what I'd been through,
Right.
or what the others had been through.
So, whether you call it a lead or a group that had been through that, so you stayed tight on it.
We had that little tight knit group, and that sort of seemed to perpetuate for years. And unfortunately, call it what you want. It would have been unfortunate for the police force because they couldn't penetrate it.
Yeah.
And they would have been saying, well, who's doing this crime? Who's doing this crime? And if it was a group of ex-tracks, you wouldn't get a beat on them.
Rock solid.
So you'd be running around looking at all the locals.
Yeah.
You know? And I guess that's where it would have been unfortunate for you guys. Where it was fortunate for us is we had loyalty and trust.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it was loyalty and trust. Even if you didn't like the bloke, there was still that loyalty. You know, if I didn't like you, if there was a personality clash there, that's no problem. If you want something from me and I can get it for you, well, then I'll get it for you.
So did that give you some of your humanity back in that environment?
Humanity.
As in, I can see when you talk about it, I can see the different levels you've gone through or different stages. The anger that comes through, the rage that you've got built up from what happened to you at Grafton when you're talking about when you're getting flogged, the way it screwed you up in Katingal. What I'm talking about now is you've got this freedom that you hadn't experienced for a long time. Did you feel that you're actually starting to be part of a society, or?
Yeah, to a certain extent. What happened, and it was a unique process in Parramatta Jail. And prisons these days, they don't adopt it. They don't give a shit. Prisons these days, they don't want you to have social intercourse with the general public or the community because they want to portray you as a two-headed monster. Yeah. That's their role. But back then, they had this. The recidivist group. Now, the recidivist group was a debating team, a debating group. That was its primary source. Yeah. Well, a lot of us entered into that. A lot of us joined it because they wanted us to join it because we were hardcore and they wanted the hardcore in there to sort of get our views on different things. And they had a magazine called Contact Magazine. Well, because I could put two words together, they nominated me to edit Contact Magazine. I said, yeah, all right, okay. So I started editing the Contact Magazine. I was part of the Resurgence. Now, what that did, the Resurgence, every Saturday morning, they had a group of visitors come in and talk to them. You know, they might be from Apex Club. They might be, well, in some cases, as it progressed, we got union officials coming in to see us. We got journalists coming in and talking to us. And that sort of opened up the door for us to converse with, say, you as a journalist on your level. So we learnt how to communicate with the general public while we were behind four walls. And I met Ann Summers there. Ann Summers came in. She'd written a book called Damned Whores and God's Police, and it was about the feminist movement. And as I said, she was a journo for the National Times. She came in, I met her there. And she gave me my first journalist job, I guess, and it was a book review on a bloke called Wally Proboon. Now, Proboon had written a book called Angel Face, and he was a UK prisoner. So I did the book review and sent it away, and it got published, and I got paid. So it was my first paying job. So I was pretty proud of that, And that was my second step on the road to journalism.
When you talked about the prison newspaper, Contact. What's the process there? Explain what that entailed.
Right. Well, in those days they had a stencil machine. Yeah. Everything had to be stenciled, and what it was originally made out to be was poetry and non. Vocal stories,
not pushing issues.
No, definitely not pushing issues. Well, of course, when I became the editor, that all changed, and the first one was mediocre. Yeah. Now there was the amount of poetry and the amount of stories about the jail, and I started interviewing crims. I had a section where I called it the in-depth interview, where you interview the football team or the sports committee and different committees in the jail. And the magazine was sent to friends of prisoners, families of prisoners, and there was a mailing list. Some of it got sent to journalists and stuff like that. It was just a normal prison magazine, I guess. But as it became radicalised,
didn't you get yourself in the shit?
Oh yeah, that was in 1978.
Was that interviewing Jockey Smith.
Yeah. Well, that was an interesting story. That one.
I think it's very creative from a journalistic point of view.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I did these in-depth interviews. Well, Jockey was at Parramatta in '78. It was a Christmas issue of 1978. It was one of my first biggest issues. And I said to Jockey, I said, listen, mate, I said, how about I do an interview? He said, yeah, all right, mate, no problem. So we sat in the exercise yard over in 6-wing or 4-wing. And I did the interview with him, and it was all about police verbal. He had a thing about police verbal. I can understand his point of view. He'd been verbal quite a few times, and it ended up turning him over on appeal and stuff like that. But that's beside the point. The fact was he was angry about verbals. So we wrote the story about verbals. I said, mate, look, the people outside aren't going to really understand this. Why don't we construct a verbal like the coppers do? He said, yeah. He said, I'm for that. I said, right. So I posed as a detective, and another Billy Sutton, he was another extract. He posed as a copper, and we posed Jockey as the one we were verbaling. And we did it exactly how the police do it.
Yep.
Name, address, and where we get the information. And the person we verbal was Frank Walker. Now, Frank Walker was then New South Wales Attorney General. So we verbal Walker into an armed robbery over at Birchgrove, a bank robbery, Commonwealth Bank.
I can't see any problems here, Bernie. Go on.
But it was perfect. It was unbelievable. Anyway, of course, when you had the stencils, they had to go to Duff.
Yep.
He had the final say on what went in the magazine, though. Now, Duff was the chief censor.
Yep.
So Duff had a flaw, and his flaw was this. Every Friday afternoon at lunchtime, him and his superiors, a couple of his crowns and his head, they'd go up to Parramatta RSL Club and get on the piss, have a liquid lunch, and come back to work. So if you went in to see Duff of a Friday afternoon after he'd been to the club, well, then you basically, if you wanted a special visit, you'd get it. If you wanted a special phone call, you'd get it. So, of course, I've run in there with the stencil and said, oh, look, I've got this issue of the magazine ready to roll out. He's looked through it, said, yeah, right, I've approved it. So, bang, it's approved, all done, all signed, sealed and delivered. So I run down to the print shop, and we were allowed to print out, I think it was about 100, maybe 200. Well, we triple that. We've got a couple of blokes in the print shop, said, just run off as many as you can. So we had about nearly 1,000 of these contact magazines. Well, they went everywhere. They went to journalists, they went to politicians, they went to anyone who was anybody, they went to. Well, of course, the police union were up in arms. And this was January 79. And they wanted the magazine banned, they wanted me drawn and quartered, and Jockey Smith was just a liar, he was dirty on police, and they really played up.
Yeah.
But what they did, and I don't know whether they did it purposely or whether he did it off his own bat, but there was a journalist from the Sydney Morning Herald, he wrote an article, and the article basically said that the jail magazine suffers, it could suffer getting banned, and the editor, Matthews, he'd concocted the story, and Jockey Smith wasn't even in the jail when it happened, and he wrote this column for the Sydney Morning Herald, and I read it, and I knew it was bullshit.
Yeah.
So I ran around, I saw Billy, I saw Jockey, I got stat decks off from affidavits. Then I went over and seen Duff, and they said, listen, I said, you authorised the magazine. He said, yeah. I said, did you find anything wrong with it? He said, no. I said, well, they're saying that this is a fabrication. He said, don't worry about it. I said, no. I said, I want to take it to the press council. He said, what? I said, I want to take it to the press council. He said, they're lying. They're wrong. Anyway, he said, do what you want. So I did. And I filed to go to the Australian Press Council complaint against the Sydney Morning Herald. And Dave Brown from the law faculty at UNSW, University of New South Wales, he ran the ball up. Now,
he represented you.
Yeah, he represented the case. He put the case up. And basically we won, but we didn't win.
Right.
Because they weren't going to say, listen, the Crims are right and yous are wrong. Mm. What he said in his judgment was that I can't determine the truth of fact, whether Sydney Morning Herald's telling the truth or whether Matthews in his Contact magazine is trying to tell them the truth. But minority voices should be equally heard. So in other words, he said, look, you've done the wrong thing, pull up.
Yeah.
But we won. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, we won. But we didn't. Yeah, it was a Pyrrhic victory. We didn't get anything out of it.
And were you allowed to continue on
with
the magazine, newspaper?
Yeah.
So did that give you a sense of the power of the media?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
after that it did.
Power of the pen.
Of the media. Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that sort of, the Jockey Smith interview, for the next 10 years, that became a learning utensil for the law faculty at the University of New South Wales and a couple of other law faculties where they were studying police procedure and legal situations and particularly verbal. So, it serves some useful purpose.
Yeah. And that would give you, in some useful purpose, saying it that way too, it makes you feel like you're doing something worthwhile within the prison. Did that give you your sense of self and worth?
You're sticking it up the system. You're saying, here's my whack. Cop that.
Yeah. So in the how long were you in Parramatta for?
We got out in June '78.
Yep.
I was there till '79. Then they transferred me to Silverwater because the parole board wouldn't release me on parole because they said I needed time to acclimatise to the outside community. Hence I had to go and work release at Silverwater. I went to Silverwater. I got off the bus. The governor said, get back on the bus, you're not here, because the screws had threatened to go on strike if I came there. So they sent me back to Parramatta. When the blokes saw me come back to Parramatta, the other tracks had gone, fuck, if they're not going to let him there, they're not going to let me there. So it fomented a potential riot.
At the riot at Parramatta Jail because they wouldn't...
Yeah, because other blokes had saw, well, I was the trailblazer. Because blokes had said to me, don't run away, Boom, whatever you do, don't fuck it up, because you're the first one.
In preparation for you to be released.
Yeah, well, other tracks like Jimmy Murray and blokes like that, they would follow on from me.
Yep.
But if I stuffed up, there was no way in the world I was going to get there. But when they sent me back, they've all looked at it and gone, poor, it's all gone up in smoke. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying in Parramatta. So, Anyway...
so how did that, if it was simmering, what the other prisoners were going to
they're going to
stage a riot?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was sitting up in the bookshop, up in the veranda of the bookshop. And a couple of blokes come up. They said, listen, Byrne, we heard what they done. Blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah. Anyway, they said, look, we're going to riot. I said, mate, you know what the repercussions are going to be, don't you? He said, yeah. I said, well, if you're going to riot, I'm telling you now, you better get a couple of hostages. Because if you haven't got hostages, they're going to come in here and they're just going to run amok. Because they got the squad outside the gate. Anyway, it was probably the wrong advice, but at the time, it was the only advice.
Yeah.
You either surrender or you take hostages.
Yeah.
Anyway, Vincent was the commissioner, and he came out to the jail. And he's deputy commissioner. They called me into the governor's office. And he said, Bernie, he said, we're here. He said, look, he said, you know why we're here? Got nothing to do with me. He said, look, he said, you know there's a riot. And it's just about to blow up. It's got nothing to do with me. He said, it's got everything to do with you. No, your jail, not mine. Anyway... They said, look, will you go out and talk to the men and talk them down until we can get this sorted out? Because we can't do nothing. Our hands are tied. What we want to do is take the Screws Union to the Arbitration Commission and get this all sorted out. Nothing to do with me.
It makes sense, but it does put you between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, well, I wasn't playing.
Yeah.
Anyway, said, will you go out and talk to the men? If you want to talk to the men, you fucking do it yourself. I'm not. And I just walked out. But luckily... a couple of blokes sort of come to their senses. Then Duff, and you've got to give him credit for this, Duff,
He's walked into the middle of the crowd over in Four Wing. They're all milling around in the X-ray. He walked straight into the middle of them, all by himself, not with a handful of screws backing him up. And he
so
said,
in credit, there's a bit of strength and courage in walking into that environment.
And you sort of got to respect the man for that.
Yeah.
You know? Anyway, he walked. He said, "Listen," he said, "this is the ball game. You got the squad waiting outside. They're waiting. They're just waiting. They want to run in. They got gas. They got guns. They got everything they want. They're going to load up the towers. Now, look, what I suggest you do is go back to your cells, let it simmer, and tomorrow's a new day." And it was summer. That was the other thing. It was summer.
Yeah.
And it was hot, stinking hot. Anyway, one bloke, he started mouthing off at Duff. He said, "Oh, fuck you." He said, "Listen, you." He said, "You've been on the fucking homebrew all afternoon. Get up to your fucking cell and sleep it off, otherwise I'll pinch you." Well, of course, everyone started laughing. That sort of broke the tension. Anyway, he said, "Look," he said, "you know, it's your call." One of the blokes said, "Listen, how about we stay out till, I think it was 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Until it gets a bit cooler because it's fucking really hot in the cells." And they said, "All right, as long as you promise to be back in the cells by 7. I want to call a muster at 7 or 6:30 or whatever time it was." And that's how it ended.
Okay.
And I ended up going to the bay, and about 2 months later, the Arbitration Commission forced the screws to back down. Said, "No, you've got to take him. His parole depends on going to works release. You've got to take him." So they took me, and that was really strange. When I went to Silverwater, the Screws Union rep was a bloke called Downs, Bob Downs. And the first night there, again, this is a whole new ball game. I'm in Silverwater, and they give you your own clothes to wear.
Yeah.
You know, your own civilian clothes.
Getting you ready for...
Yeah, and you know, that's a whole new thing. You know, a fucking pair of jeans instead of greens. You know, whoa. Anyway, Downs was, as I said, the Screws Union rep, and I thought, I'm going to hunt him down. So I looked around. Now I tracked him down one night. I pulled him. So, you Mr. Downs? He said, "Yeah." I said, "My name's Matthews." He said, "Yeah, I know you are." I said, "Look," I said, "I've done nearly 11 years. I said, I'm on the way out. I said, I don't want any trouble. I'm not here to cause you or your screws or anyone else any trouble. I just want to get out." Anyway, he looked at me and said, "All right, Matthews." He said, "You don't cause me trouble, I won't cause you trouble." Fair enough. And that's the way it was. And I wouldn't say we became friends, but, you know, he turned out all right.
You've got to respect people that, are true to their word.
Yeah, well, see, I got into a deep conversation with him one night.
Yeah.
And I said, "You know, you and your fucking mates, you's brutalised us at fucking Grafton." And he said, "Bernie," he said, "I knew nothing about it." I said, "Oh, fucking don't give me that shit. Everyone knows about it." He said, "I didn't."
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the way it was.
Got to accept it.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more right after this. I think now that might be a good time to have another break. Again, just fascinating. Katingal, it sounds like it's seen out of a horror movie. And the other stuff that you've... getting to the point where they're going to release you after such a violent time. And when we come back for part 4, and congratulations, because we've never made it to a part 4 on I Catch Killers. So this is a
I hope this doesn't go to 5 and 6.
No, we'll give you 4.
Okay.
Just 4 on the bottom.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, from 1970.
Yeah, that's where it's all started. This is the full circle. But look, what we're going to cover off on for the part 4.
Yeah.
Is going into the world of journalism. I'm interested in that, how you've turned that round. I also want to talk about, well, one thing that we haven't covered on, and it's backdating a little bit, but the prison break from Parramatta, which was digging the tunnel.
78.
Because I just think that's amazing, an amazing story, and it's something that you see on the movies, but actually digging the tunnel under a prison. Also, how you balance out prison life, and you mentioned there with Duff saying get back because you've been on the home brew.
Yeah.
Your time as the SP bookmaker at Parramatta, and the home brew and the concerts that had at Parramatta, and all sorts of things that people from the outside just don't understand about prisons.
Well, see, what that did, Gary, is that sort of gave you a feel of reality on the other side of the wall.
Yeah, well...
You know? And they don't do that anymore. They don't want that.
They don't want you to know what it's like out here. They just want to just roll you out and pull a pin on you and let you explode.
Well, see, it makes sense that you've got to integrate back into society at some stage, and you need to be in touch with it. And I'm no expert, obviously, but that just seems to be common sense. But look, we'll discuss that. And anything else you want to discuss in the final part?
Told you, mate, you're pulling the train.
Cheers. Make sure you join us for part 4 of our guest Bernie Matthews on I Catch Killers. Having worked as a cop for the majority of my career and been well acquainted with Bernie Matthews' reputation as an armed robber and escapee, I'm finding our conversation really interesting. At the height of my career, I never envisaged I would be sitting down with someone like Bernie and having a conversation like this. Make sure you join us for part 4 of Bernie Matthews on I Catch Killers. Thank you for listening to this episode of I Catch Killers. My podcast was made possible with the support of subscribers to icatchkillers.com.au. For ad-free access to new episodes of I Catch Killers before anyone else, exclusive content like videos of my interviews, and award-winning investigative journalism, go to icatchkillers.com.au to see our range of subscription offers.